The letter came a week after the funeral, as if the mail itself had been trained to arrive late when my heart was least ready. I am Nora Calloway, 32, renter of an upstairs studio that smells like last winter's paint. The morning the envelope arrived, the sky over Port Larkin was the pale color of laundry water, and the mail carrier handed it to me with both hands, like a small, sleeping animal. My grandmother's return address was typed in a tidy font I knew she learned from the library's free computer classes. She had been gone 10 days. I could still hear the way the church doors groaned when they closed behind me, could still taste the awkward sweetness of the cheap coffee served beside a pyramid of store-bought cookies. My mother, Lila, had arranged everything with my Uncle Darren. They were efficient, brisk, private. Small family service, my mother said on the phone 2 days before it happened, her voice so even it sounded like a recorded announcement. She would have wanted it simple. I wasn't asked to speak. I wasn't asked to help. When I offered the quilt I'd repaired last spring, the one with my grandmother's initials stitched in auburn thread, my mother said, "We'll manage, Nora." Manage was one of her favorite words, used like a door that could close any conversation. I stood in the back pew during the service, the quilt folded in my bag, and watched the pastor mention all the hands my grandmother had held in her decades as a midwife's aide. He did not mention mine. Grandma June was the softest place I ever fell. When I was 10 and brought home a permission slip for the Recorder concert, she took the afternoon off to watch me squeak through hot cross buns, and afterwards she pulled a wrapped lemon bar from her purse like a magician. When I was 19 and dropped out of community college, ashamed and raw, she let me sleep for a month on her couch and wake to eggs in a skillet and a voice telling me, "One mistake is not a life." She hummed the same melody whenever she mended anything, a hum that sounded like a well-lit kitchen and calm. But family is a crowded word. My mother, who loved order, disliked my pauses. She married a man who ran numbers for a car dealership and loved efficiency more than empathy. Uncle Darren argued with Grandma about selling the house while she was still well enough to hear them. "It's a sagging 2-bedroom on a big lot," he said at Thanksgiving, waving his fork. "A developer would pay double what it's worth." Grandma June smiled and poured herself another cup of tea. "It's worth what it's worth," she said. To me. I noticed my mother's mouth pinch at the edges like a tied trash bag. After the funeral, decisions moved like a river I could not step into. The house was cleared in 2 days. I asked if I could take the wicker chair from the porch, the one where Grandma watched the neighborhood children chalk the sidewalk. "It's all being handled," my mother texted back. "Don't worry." Worry sat in my chest anyway, a small, folded animal. When I slit the envelope, the paper inside had the faintest scent of lavender and starch. The letter was dated 3 weeks before she died. My grandmother's handwriting, made deliberate by arthritis, leaned forward as if striding to meet me. "My Nora," it began. "If this arrives late, don't be angry with the mail, be gentle with the timing. Some things must ripen, even grief. I need to tell you something that will sound like a door unlocking." By the second paragraph my hands had started to shake. She mentioned a key. She mentioned a tin. She mentioned that she had asked Miss Pembridge next door to witness a signature, and that a man named Ethan Mallory at Mallory and Fisk knew to expect me. She asked me to read the letter somewhere quiet, and to take a breath before I decided what I wanted to do with what I found. Outside my window, a child drew a hopscotch grid and laughed when the chalk snapped. Downstairs, Mr. Alvarez cursed his stubborn radio. I read the letter twice, then a third time, each pass easing the blur in my vision. I set it on the counter and pressed my palm to it, as if I could feel her through the paper. "A door," she'd written. "Unlocking." I looked toward Port Larkin's east end, where her house still stood between 2 newer builds like an elder refusing to move from her pew. The first spark of tension, a bright wire under the quiet, thrummed through me. The timing was late. The message was not. I took the bus to the East End with the letter folded in a sandwich bag to keep it dry. The ride passed our single-screen cinema, a thrift store with men's blazers in the window like tired soldiers, and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and heat. When I stepped onto my grandmother's street, the air carried the scent of wet pine and paint. A "for sale" sign had sprouted from the lawn like a foreign plant. The company logo was a cheerful son wearing sunglasses. A bright plastic flyer box hung beneath it, empty. The house looked smaller without her. The porch sagged at one corner, and the new owners of the craftsman next door had installed a cedar fence that made our yard seem temporarily borrowed. A padlock hung on the gate, new and silvery. I touched it and felt the sting of small betrayal. Miss Pembridge's car, a faded green sedan, wasn't in her driveway. I slid the letter back into my bag and sat on the front steps, recalling the key my grandmother had mentioned, the tin, the instructions. I wasn't sure what hurt more, knowing she had made a plan without telling me in person, or realizing she hadn't trusted the people closest to her to honor it. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother: "House is listed. Don't complicate things, Nora. We're finally closing a chapter." Her words had the crispness of new legal pads. I typed, then erased, "Then why does it feel like you closed it on my fingers?" The exclusion bled into everything. At the diner where I poured coffee for men who left their truck engines idling, I heard a regular say, "Shame about that old place. They'll do something nice there." When I cleared his plate, he added, softer, "Your grandma always kept the hydrangeas neat." I nodded and refilled his cup, careful not to spill. At home, our group family chat flashed photo after photo of boxes, of progress, of the house emptied of quilts and recipe cards. No one asked whether I wanted the wicker chair, the wooden rolling pin with the faint groove from decades of hands, the pie cooling rack that never really cooled anything because Grandma insisted pies were meant to be eaten warm. The loneliness felt clinical, like a cold instrument on skin. I read her letter again in the lamplight. My Nora. If Miss Pembridge is out, check the back. You remember where we hid the extra? Under the loose board, by the screen door. The tin is behind the mason jars in the pantry. The key in the envelope will make sense when you see the lock. Take it to Mr. Mallory. Trust your pace. Love, June. There was a key taped inside the envelope, smaller than I expected, with a round head and a number etched on it, 413. I held it between my fingers and felt a small current of courage. The isolation did what it always does when you respect it. It clarified things. I needed to see what Grandma had left for me to find, and I needed to do it without telling my mother, who would call at least 3 people before deciding whether to approve. That night, after my shift, I put on my quietest shoes and walked the 4 blocks to the house. The street was darker than I remembered, not for lack of lights but for lack of her porch lamp. I slipped through the side yard where the grass still remembered her feet. The loose board was still loose. The spare key was still there. Her faith in small routines made my throat ache. Inside, the air held the faint scent of dust and dish soap. The pantry looked bare in the way empty kitchens still hold the shape of meals. I reached behind the mason jars and found the tin, dented at one corner, the lid secured with a rubber band that had gone brittle. Inside were folded papers, a cassette tape, a tiny blue flash drive, and an index card with a careful list, deed addendum, notarized. Savings account info, credit union. Letter to Nora, read second. Ethan Mallory, attorney. I sat on the linoleum floor, my back against the cabinet, and read until the neighbor's porch light clicked off. The addendum was recent and official. The savings account had my name as a payable on death beneficiary. The small letter inside was even shorter than the one that had found me by mail. It said only, "Hold steady. This house is meant for people, not profit. Take this to Ethan. I do not want them to sell it to feed their hurry." The sound of a car door somewhere down the block snapped me back. I repacked the tin and slipped out the back, the key heavy in my pocket. My phone pinged again as I reached the sidewalk. A message from my mother: "There's a cash buyer. Close in 10 days. We'll all be relieved." I stood under the dark shape of the hydrangeas and felt the vow arrive inside me quietly, like a tide shifting. I would not rage. I would not beg. I would take the tin to Mr. Mallory in the morning, and I would honor what my grandmother had asked of me. I would learn the language my mother respected: paper, signatures, timing, and I would speak it, calmly. Mallory and Fisk occupied the second floor of a brick building above a shoe repair shop that had survived 3 recessions and a flood. The hallway smelled faintly of leather polish. Inside, a receptionist with kind eyebrows offered me water and gestured to 2 chairs. "Mr. Mallory will be right with you," she said. I held the tin on my lap like a promise. Ethan Mallory looked the way people draw lawyers in the margins of their notebooks: tall, a little rumpled, with a tie that suggested more function than flair. He shook my hand and then, to my surprise, sat on the edge of the conference table rather than behind it. "Nora," he said, as if he'd practiced the name. "I'm sorry for your loss." June was a force. "She was," I said, and set the tin between us. "She told me to bring this." He opened the tin gently, as if it held something breathing. He read the deed addendum first, then the bank information, then the index card. When he reached the line about not selling the house to feed anyone's hurry, he exhaled through his nose in a way that said he had heard that hurry before. "Your grandmother came to see me about 2 months ago," he said. She was clear-minded and firm. "We executed a transfer-on-death deed that places the property in a small trust with very specific use restrictions." He slid a copy toward me, each page clipped with a tidy binder clip. "Upon her death, the house does not pass to her children. It enters the June Calloway Community Trust, with you as trustee. The terms state that the property must be used for educational and community health purposes for a minimum of 5 years before any sale can be considered. If family members attempt to sell it during that period, the trust converts the remaining liquid assets," he tapped the bank document, "into funding for the community project and revokes their beneficiary status for those funds." I blinked. "She wanted a clinic." "Not exactly," he said, smiling a little. "She wanted a porch," in her words. "A place where people could bring their questions, their babies, their laundry, their worries, and leave with help. The trust language is broad enough to include classes, after-school programs, a drop-in lactation support group, a lending pantry." She liked the word porch because it was honest. People tell the truth on porches. I touched the cassette tape. "And this?" "A recording of her wishes," he said. "We can digitize it, but she asked me to play it with you here first." He rose, crossed to a small stereo on a side shelf, and pressed the tape into the deck with the care of someone placing a brittle wing back on a bird. Grandma June's voice filled the room, grainy, warm, unhurried. "If you're hearing this, Ethan, it means I'm not around to remind Nora to eat before noon." A soft chuckle, then a pause. "Nora, darling. You know how we have sturdy bones. This house is a bone. It holds us up. I've talked blue in the face to your mother and brother, and I don't fault their pace. They were born in a hurry. But this place is not for hurrying. It's for staying. If they try to move faster than the porch allows, this trust will slow them down. Give them tea. If they refuse it, serve tea to someone else." There was a rustle, and then the kind of breath people take when they're about to say the truest thing. "I also know," she continued, "that you've been made to feel like a delay. You are not. You are a rhythm. There is music in your way of doing things, and this town, and that house, need it." The tape clicked softly as Ethan stopped it. I had to look away for a moment, toward the window and the long box of geraniums, to steady myself. My mother and Uncle Darren cleared the house, I said, when my voice worked again. There's a "for sale" sign on the lawn. They don't have the authority to sell, he said. They may think they do. We can file a notice of trust and record the transfer on death deed today. It will put a temporary hold on any pending sale. If there's a cash buyer, the title company will pause the closing. I swallowed. My mother left me off everything. She sent me one-line texts. I don't want to humiliate her. I just want this to be right. Quiet justice is still justice, he said. And your grandmother structured this so the truth will speak without you having to raise your voice. He slid a business card toward me. We'll notify your family's attorney, if they've engaged one. We'll inform the listing agent. If anyone has been intercepting mail or concealing documents, he glanced at the letter, that will likely surface when we ask for the correspondence file. As if conjured by our words, my phone lit with a message from my mother, title company scheduled. Don't insert yourself. We're doing what's best for everyone. Mr. Mallory read it, only because I turned the screen without meaning to. The corner of his mouth lowered in consideration. Let's keep responses to a minimum, he said. Clarity, kindness, documentation. He stood and gathered the papers with the speed of someone who'd done this before. Miss Pembridge is listed as witness. She'll be glad to confirm. I left the office with a folder that felt heavier than its paper should allow. On the sidewalk, the shoe repair bell tinkled behind me, 2 notes, homie. I realized I was hungry. I bought a bakery cinnamon roll and ate it on the bench across from the courthouse, the frosting sticking to my fingers like an oath. The town moved around me in its small, familiar loops. Somewhere across town, a "for sale" sign tried to look inevitable. I wiped my hands and breathed. The resolve that had arrived like a tide the night before now felt like a shoreline, defined and steady. We filed the papers that afternoon. The process was not dramatic. It was a stack, a stamp, a date, a "thank you." Quiet, the way my grandmother preferred. The title company scheduled the closing for Wednesday at noon. We arrived at 11:30. Mr. Mallory wore the same sensible tie. I wore the only dress I owned that fit like a choice rather than an apology. The lobby smelled like copier toner and lemon cleaner. A receptionist asked us to sign in. The wall clock ticked loudly, measuring out our intentions. My mother walked in at 5 to noon, hair pulled tight, lips the same color as her nails. Uncle Darren followed with a wide smile that did not reach his eyes and a man in a navy blazer who introduced himself as the buyer's representative. We're excited to help bring new life to that old place, the man said brightly, as if speaking to a child's classroom. Mixed use, maybe even a coffee bar. Mr. Mallory set a hand flat on the folder. Before anyone signs, he said in a voice that belonged to long hallways and sensible shoes, we need to review a recorded transfer on death deed and the trust that now holds the property. My mother looked at me, not him. Nora, she said, with a small warning bell in it. What have you done? I followed Grandma's instructions, I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, like lake water. The closer, a man with a silver pen and a tired tie, frowned at his screen. I'm not seeing, oh. He tapped a key, then another. This was recorded yesterday afternoon. He looked up. It changes ownership upon death to the June Callaway Community Trust, with use restrictions. The buyer's representative's smile faltered. There must be a mistake, he said. We have a signed listing agreement and a negotiated cash offer. Mr. Mallory slid copies across the table, each page trailed by a small, paper-clipped weight. Miss Callaway made her intent clear, he said. The trust is irrevocable. The property cannot be sold for 5 years, and any attempt to do so directs liquid assets to the trust and removes individual beneficiaries who act contrary to the terms. Uncle Darren's chair creaked. June didn't know what she was doing, he said. She was sick. She was confused. Miss Pembridge witnessed the signatures, Mr. Mallory replied. Her affidavit is attached. June also recorded a statement on tape. He nodded at me. I set the small digitized file, a courtesy copy he'd made from the cassette, on the table. The closer plugged it into a speaker meant for conference calls. My grandmother's voice filled the room, the same unhurried strength that could talk a screaming newborn into a sigh. If they're trying to sell my porch, she said, tell them they'll have to make their own somewhere else. This one is for the town. The silence after the recording was complete. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. My mother unconsciously smoothed the hem of her skirt. June was always sentimental, she said, but the words lacked weight. She was looking at the paper, at the seal, at the dates that were recent and inarguable. We had plans, she added, softer, as if she had only just remembered them. Plans can be redirected, Mr. Mallory said. So can assets. The savings account listed here, he tapped our folder, is payable on death to the trust. Those funds will seed the project. The buyer's representative cleared his throat. We'll have to cancel, he said to the closer. We can't take title with this restriction. Our investor group doesn't do joint ventures with porches. His attempt at humor died quickly. He collected his papers with the quiet desperation of a man who had promised an easy afternoon. Uncle Darren looked at my mother. Can't you talk to her? He asked, meaning me as if I were a teenager again. This isn't practical. I met his eyes. It's not fast, I said. That's different from impractical. He pushed his chair back and stood. You always were a slowdown, he muttered, but his bravado slid off the edges of his words like water off a plate. Enough, my mother said. She was still seated, hands on the table, studying the shape of our family in the reflection of the polished wood. In her face I saw fatigue, pride, a wary respect she was trying not to show, the ache of being the one who always moved things along. She looked at me the way people look at a path they didn't take. June wanted this. She did, I said. She told me to hold steady. The closer printed a cancellation and slid it to the buyer's man. Mr. Mallory signed the notice of trust receipt with his sturdy pen. Somewhere down the hall, a copier hummed. My mother pressed her fingers against her temple, then dropped her hand. Then we're done here, she said, not to me, not to anyone in particular. We stood. No one shouted. No one slammed a door. The justice wasn't the kind that demanded noise. It was the kind that made a room still because something correct had finally taken up its space. Outside, the noon light lay across the parking lot like a clean sheet. Mr. Mallory shook my hand and said, now we begin the quiet part, the building. My mother walked past me without touching my arm, but she didn't quicken her pace. At the edge of the lot she turned, as if to say something, then didn't. That small restraint, in our family, felt like a kind of apology. Early mornings became my favorite hour. I would unlock the gate at June's house just as the sky lifted from gray to pale blue, the grass still jeweled with the night's damp. The "For Sale" sign was gone. In its place, the hand-painted two-board sign Miss Pembridge lettered in deliberate brushstrokes, June's porch, a place to pause, learn, and be helped. Some days a kettle steamed on the porch table. Some days a basket appeared as if conjured, holding 2 jars of baby formula, a stack of diapers, and a note that read, "Take what you need, leave what you can." We started small, as Grandma would have liked. Tuesdays were for a lactation circle led by a retired nurse who still wore her hair in the calm bun of her decades on the maternity floor. Wednesdays after school I taught a homework hour. I am not an academic, but I know how to sit beside a child and turn fractions into something you can see in an apple. Friday mornings, Miss Pembridge ran a mending clinic where the sound of scissors was the same as laughter and the word we used most was good. The hydrangeas bloomed a rash of blue in June, and on hot afternoons we dragged chairs into their shade, the porch humming like something remembered on purpose. The trust's funds covered paint, permits, a battered printer, a bookshelf we built from 2 crates and an old door. A local carpenter donated a ramp. The shoe repairman from downstairs at Mr. Mallory's building taught a class on how to make a pair of inexpensive school shoes last the whole year. Use polish, he said, every week, like a sermon. Polish is love with bristles. My mother came by one afternoon in July, late enough that the light was gold. She wore flats instead of heels and carried a bowl of cut fruit covered in plastic wrap. She stood at the porch steps, the threshold where you can still decide to turn back. I was at the market, she said, as if the sentence might apologize for the months behind it. They were giving out too many peaches. Then you had to help the porch, I said, and she nodded as if we had agreed to a truce before either of us knew we needed one. We ate peaches over paper napkins, the juice running down our wrists, the flavor clearly better than any logic. We watched a toddler in a blue shirt stack wooden blocks in a concentrated fury. My mother dabbed her wrist with a napkin and said, softly, your grandmother would be pleased. It was not an extravagant thing to say, but in our house extravagance had always been measured by the number of words withheld. It felt like a gift. Uncle Darren did not visit. He sent a single text the week we hung the sign, a punctuation of frustration with no subject line. I did not return it. He and the developer found another project on the far side of town, where the soil had no memory of our footsteps. Sometimes justice is a silent hallway you walk down alone, and the most important sound is your own breath. At night, after locking up, I swept the porch boards that creaked in the same rhythm they always had. I kept the wicker chair for last, brushing under it in slow strokes. On the small table beside it, I placed the tin, now empty of papers and full instead of the tiny objects people had left behind, a single marble, a note that said my baby slept 2 hours today thank you, a crochet hook, a library card application with a proud parent signature, a receipt torn into a heart. I played the digitized recording occasionally, not for reassurance but for the pleasure of hearing a voice that had always made my shoulders drop. Some mornings the garden needed me before the porch did. I planted herbs where the lawn burned thin, and the first time I chopped chives into a bowl of eggs for a woman who had had no appetite since giving birth, she cried into her breakfast. I didn't know I was hungry, she said. We sat together and waited for that to become obvious to the rest of her day as well. Mr. Mallory visited once a month to sign whatever needed signing and to sit for 10 minutes with his coffee, looking like a man who had found a bench where benches were rare. June found a way to legislate kindness, he said. Not easy, not common. I nodded. She didn't legislate it, I said. She gave it a place to sit. On the first anniversary of her death, we set out lemonade in mason jars and cut 2 lemon bars on a small plate, a tribute to her purse magic. A teenager read a poem about a town being the shape of the people who remain. A new father fixed the loose hinge on the gate without comment. The sun slid down in a way that made every face look like a promise. I stood at the porch rail, my hands sticky with lemon and sugar, and felt the long hum of my grandmother's mending song move through me. My life had not been straightened. It had been stitched. There is a difference. The quiet revenge, if that is what it should be called, was not a headline or a courtroom victory. It was the way my mother set down a bowl of peaches and stayed to eat one. It was a cancelled sale and a sign painted by a neighbor. It was a place changed from an address into a verb. The letter had arrived late, but not too late. It had opened a door that was always there, disguised as a porch where a person could rest without being asked to prove why they needed to. I swept the boards again, the light thin as paper. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed, and the sound flashed against the evening like a small bell. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.